They call us the Office of Holy Burial, but we are only 3 men and a ledger that never runs out of ink. I am the youngest. My name is Tomas of Viarno, though in the records it appears as Tomas, Custodian Third, because names are for the living and we serve the dead. We work under the Archbishop of the Gloaming, a man who speaks softly, signs with black wax, and never casts a shadow where candles burn. When a priest falls to corruption, when the breath in his chest turns cold and his mouth keeps moving in prayer after the heartbeat stops, a sealed cart arrives at our back gate before dawn. We lower the bar, we take the weight, and the chain of the church is unbroken another day. I did not choose this. That is true and not true at the same time. When I was a boy, Brother Aurelian found me asleep between the graves after the autumn fast, clutching a bell rope in both hands. My village had lost 6 men to fever that smelled of iron. I tied myself to the bell because the sounds from the ground would not stop, and I wanted proof that I was awake. Brother Aurelian said I had the right kind of fear. He brought me to the abbey, taught me letters, showed me how to listen for what is under a voice. In time he took me down to the crypts and put a shovel in my hands. There, beneath the altars and the stone saints, he showed me the book. We keep the book in a chest bound with iron and olive wood. Its cover is calfskin gone hard with age, the title pressed in cramped Latin that looks carved rather than written. De Sepultura Maledicta. I copied that title more than 100 times before I dared ask what it meant beyond the gloss they gave us. Cursed burial, Brother Aurelian said. But then he pressed my forehead and whispered, "No, consecrated custody. We do not bury to hide. We bury to hold." Everything I do begins with that book. It is not long, but there is no empty space on its pages. Each line is ink and instruction and warning. The ink shines a little when the lamp is low. It teaches me how to prepare a body that still moves its lips, how to answer a voice that prays after the breath is ended, how to set a seal that holds under winter and war. It lists saints and orders that make no sense until the 3rd reading. It lists wines and waters and the temperatures of coals. It lists the hours of the night when the earth listens, and the hours when the earth answers back. Whenever I follow it exactly, the corridor air stays still. When I do not, the wicks tremble and burn long tears. Our workroom sits 3 flights below the sacristy. The first flight is the public crypt, where benefactors sleep in their carved houses and visitors come on feast days with candles and coins. The second flight is where the old brothers lie side by side under plain slabs, their names scratched by a nervous hand and softened by time. The third flight is ours. The steps stop at a door without a lock. No one opens it by accident. The air is cooler than cellars and warmer than caves. Salt blooms, white on the walls, where the mortar meets the stone. The floor is packed earth marked by tracks my shovel has made for 7 winters. The lamps are set high because shadows bend differently in these rooms, and we are not allowed to feed them. To the left of the door, we keep the tools. 2 shovels, 3 mattocks, a hand auger, a mallet of ash, a copper funnel, and a clay jar sealed with red twine. The jar holds our mixture of sacramental wine and living blood. We renew it every new moon. The wine we draw from the altar, the blood from the living hand of the custodian who has carried the book that month. Blood pricks my palm often, and the scar is a thin white comma under my thumb. In the center stands the washing table. Behind it, a row of basins, a coals pan, and a rack for linens that have already been read over. On the right, the shelves, wax and black sticks, wax and white cakes, a bundle of rope made from flax that has never seen the sun, and 7 small bells that do not ring unless they are asked. A cart arrives, and the bells answer. I hear them long before the wheels grind the outer stones. They do not chime, they clear their throats. I lift the bar. The driver never speaks. His hat is low, his collar high, his glove stiff with salt. The cart is nailed and bound with 3 strips of linen that have been signed with a cross pressed in soot. I do not break the linen. Brother Aurelian used to say, we untie, we never break. Breaking is for those who want to feel strong. Untying is for those who want to remain alive. So I soak the knots with holy water, and I loosen them while I count 7 by 7s, slow and careful, because because haste is a door with no hinge. Inside, the body lies turned to the right, mouth bound with cloth, hands crossed and tied with cord that has been measured against the altar rail. The eyes are covered with thin lead leaves punched with pinprick stars. Sometimes the lead is warm, sometimes it's cold. If the mouth cloth is wet, I change it for a dry one before we move him. If the jaw works under the cloth, I recite the psalms assigned to that movement until the jaw slows. If the tongue moves against the cloth as if tasting, I do not speak at all, because words can feed as surely as blood. We carry the body to the washing table. I unwrap the hands first and cross them myself. I always repeat the crossing, even if the cord still holds. It is not for the dead. It is for me, so that the order of things lives in my fingers. Then the feet, then the band at the chest, which I loosen to release the list rolled inside. Every body comes to us with a narrow strip of vellum tucked under the chest band. The name, the parish, the hour of the last mass he said before the corruption took root, and the phrase the last witness heard before the mouth kept moving on its own. These phrases are not strange in themselves. The strangeness is in their order and repetition. Ave Maria can be a key or a threat, depending on which hour it tries to repeat. Kyrie eleison can be a plea or a password, depending on the breath that carries it. I copy the strip into our ledger with the exact hand that it came in, so the book remembers not only words, but the way the letters lean. I wash the body with water warmed over coals. The water must steam, but cannot boil. If it boils, the skin rises and peels, and the book says the seal will not adhere. I speak the ordinary prayers. I do not ask questions. I wash the face last. If the lips move, I do not stop them. If the lips stop, I wait a moment to be sure they are not resting between phrases. When I am finished, I dry the skin with linen that has already heard a blessing. New linen is too proud. It does not give. Used linen remembers what it has carried and obeys. The coffin is pine-lined with rough wool. We mark it with 3 signs. The cross at the head cut shallow, the sign of the key on the right side, and a circle on the left with a line at the top like a closed eye. The wax seals go in 4 places, but we melt the black and the white together in the copper funnel, so the line between them is never clean. I prick my palm, let 3 drops fall into the wine in the clay jar, stir with a thorn, and brush the mixture over the seals with a goose feather. If the feather bends and will not spring back, we heat the wax longer. If the feather snaps, we start again with a new feather and a new prayer. The book is very clear on this point. The seal must accept the human and the holy at once, or it will accept neither when the hour turns. You might ask, why me? Why Tomas of Viarno, small in the shoulders and easy to bruise, put to this work that makes men older than their fathers by the time they are 20? Brother Aurelian told me once that I hear timings. Not music, he said, but the space between notes. I thought he mocked me. Then he took me to the stairs between the 2nd and the 3rd flight and asked me to point to the stone where the cold begins. I put my hand out and it hovered over the 3rd step from the bottom. He put his hand out and it hovered over the same step. We did not speak for a long time after that. Later in the infirmary, he said that those who keep custody must be the ones who can tell when a prayer is for God and when it is for the earth. He said the earth is a great listener and a worse judge, and that some prayers are shaped to slip past the one and cut into the other. He said my fear was a straight line and not a knot. Feel like that makes a good blade. When the preparations are done, I wait. I am not allowed to lower a coffin during the day. The book says the sun seals with pride and pride cracks at night. We bury by lamplight between the 2nd and the 3rd hour after sunset, when the walls breathe out and the ground lets go of its heat. Before that hour, I sit by the coffin with the ledger open and the goose feather in my hand. If the lips move under the cloth, I listen for the word that is not a word. Sometimes it is only the grinding of teeth. Sometimes it is a list of saints, but one name is placed where it does not belong, and I circle it lightly in the ledger. Once, the moving mouth formed the name Tomas, and I circled nothing and wrote nothing and let the feather rest. Brother Aurelian died in winter. He had been gray for many seasons. thinning away like smoke that will not take to rafters. He left the key to the chest and the book, and he left me a string of 7 knots. When the Archbishop's man came down to the workroom and laid the black seal on the bench, he said only, "Custodian second now," and then he was gone. That night I took the string and hung it on the lamp hook. The knots cast shadows that looked like teeth. I did not sleep. I watched the door with no lock, and I remembered the step where the cold begins. There's a reason we never leave the 3rd flight unattended once a coffin has been sealed. The reason is not grand. It is not even secret. The reason is that quiet is a property and not a gift. If you do not hold it, something else will. I learned that on my 2nd year, when a visiting canon from the upper city lost his way and opened our door looking for a store of wine. He had a lamp, and he was drunk, and he was singing a tavern hymn as if it were a psalm. I did not think a song could cut. Now I know better. He left with a scorched sleeve and a face gone white to the lips, and we resealed what we could reseal and waited 3 days for the walls to stop whispering. You will hear rumors about our dead. You will hear that some were not dead when they reached us. You will hear that some spoke after we sealed them, and that the seals melted and then cooled again even though no flame touched them. You will hear that the church uses us to bury shame, not horror. I am a custodian. I have no argument for rumor. I have only the work. Tonight, a cart waits beyond the gate. The bells clear their throats. Brother Aurelian is gone. The Archbishop's seal is warm between my fingers. I set the lamp high and steady. I untie and do not break, and I measure the silence between the breaths that are not breaths. If you ask what I do, I will tell you plainly. I prepare men of God for a ground that would rather hold them awake. And if you ask why me, I will tell you this. Because I can hear when the prayer is not a prayer, and because someone must. I did not learn the rules from the book alone. Brother Aurelian said the book teaches your eyes, but the room must teach your hands and your breath. He made me copy each rule into the ledger in my own script, then made me prove I could keep it when the lamps guttered, when footsteps came, when the mouth under the cloth would not stop moving. The rules are short. They are not simple. 1. Never bury a priest while the body is still praying. We test the prayer 3 ways. First, the feather. I lay the goose feather across the lips and watch for the slight lift when a word is formed without breath. It is not the rise of a living breath. It is a twitch, like a thread tightening. Second, the thread. A single horsehair tied to a reed and rested between the teeth. If the hair hums against the reed, the prayer is still looking for a throat to wear. Third, the silence count. I recite 7 saints in order and leave the same space between each name. If the mouth moves in spaces, the prayer is not a prayer. It is an opening. We wait. We always wait. The book says the earth is patient and corruption is more patient than the earth. If the movement never stops before the burial hour, we bind the mouth again, place a taper at the feet, and keep custody until the next night. Once in my 1st year, I grew angry and tightened the cloth until the movement ceased. The lamps hissed. The feather bent and would not spring back. Brother Aurelian loosened the cloth with a wet thumb and said, "You do not win by choking a river. You win by moving the banks." 2. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn. He called it the confession that is not for you. The newly sealed do not know what they are. They need to be heard walks before their understanding. It sounds exactly like feet. It can be slow or quick, careful or clumsy, but it always stops the instant your shoulders tighten to turn. If you turn, you give it 2 gifts, your face and your name. Faces and names are bridges. If you do not turn, you can deny both. The answer is spoken forward, into the room, the way a priest speaks toward the nave. Confession is not for a house. Pass to your patron and rest. If the steps begin again, you repeat the same words and add the patron's name from the vellum strip under his chest band. If you do not have the strip, you use the abbey's patron. If you use your own name by mistake, you must ring the smallest of the 7 bells and sit very still until the bell falls silent on its own. This has happened only once while I kept watch. The prints had left on the earth were not feet, but long ovals, as if toes had learned to write. 3. Seal with 3 drops of living blood and sacramental wine. People who have never been below think seals are about wax and symbols and iron. Those are edges. The seal is a debt. The living owes himself to the keeping of the dead, and the dead, recognizing the debt, cannot ask for more. 3 drops for the body, the word, and the breath. The drops must be cut from the hand that holds the book that month. The blood must come from skin that has not taken strong drinks and sunset. If you are fevered, another custodian bears the book while you heal. Fevered blood clouds the wine, and the feather test will fail. The wine is drawn from the altar and not from cellars. Cellar wine knows sleep. Altar wine knows vows. We stir with a thorn because iron remembers blows and ash remembers fires, but thorn remembers only sap. The copper funnel marries the black and white wax so they cannot reject each other in the cold. If the mixture accepts the wick without hissing, it has accepted you. If it spits, you have not finished your confession, or you are thinking of something you want more than your duty. I have had to start again more than once. Desire is loud under stone. 4. Never bury 2 priests in the same night. The earth can count. Bodies are not stones. They are stories with their endings torn off. If you lay 2 endings down before the ground is finished reading the first, the ground begins to compare them. The prayers that have lost their breath lean toward each other, and the leaning makes a wind. In that wind, the younger calls and the older answers, and the one who has more days left in his bones will try to rise to finish the sentence that his life did not finish. The book tells a story from the winter of wolves, when 2 carts came together in a blizzard, and the custodian, alone and afraid of the storm, broke the rule to spare himself a second trip down the stairs. The bells chattered like teeth. The wax ran cold as if it had never melted. By morning, 1 coffin lay with its lid split from within, and the floor was rucked like a blanket pulled by a child. The ledger shows the line drawn between the 2 names. It is the only line in the ledger that is not words. We keep sand from the cistern of St. Renaud in a jar for the night when a second cart arrives too late. We spread the sand in a thin path across the threshold, and we wait until dawn. I have spread that sand twice and waited with the lamps high and the rope of 7 knots around my wrist. We did not bury. We did not break. 5. If the coffin opens on its own, speak the patron's name until the air smells of incense. Coffin lids can slip if a nail bends or the wool lining pulls. That is not what the rule is for. Sometimes you set your palm on the wood to push a seal into the grain, and the lid lifts against your hand like a sleeper turning in bed. You will want to press. You must not press. Pressure makes the dead stubborn. Names make them obedient. You take the vellum strip and speak the patron 3 times with the small pause that belongs to church Latin and not to street talk. If the air does not change, you use the name of the parish written on the strip. If that fails, you use the abbey's name. And if even that fails, you stand back and read the 7 psalms for enemies as if you meant every word. The smell will come, sweet at first, then bitter, then sweet again, as if the room has remembered how to breathe. Do not look for smoke. The book says incense is not smoke in these rooms, it is obedience. When the smell steadies, the lid will settle and the wax will take your thumbprint. Only then may you lift the mallet. These are the rules as written, but there are habits around them. Fences for the fence. The lamps must be set high so your shadow cannot enter the coffin before the body does. The feet must lie to the east so the mouth points away from the door. The cord around the hands must be measured against the altar rail and not guessed. Guesswork is pride that pretends to be cleverness. We use rope spun from flax that has never seen the sun because sun-touched fibers swell at night and can loosen and knot without anyone touching it. We salt the mouth band with rose salt and not with common salt because rose salt remembers gardens and common salt remembers the sea. And gardens calm the earth while the sea makes it restless. If you must hum while you work, you hum the first line of the night hymn and not the second. The second rises and can lift lids if your tone is strong. Brother Aurelian taught the rules with tests. For the first, he sat me on the washing bench and had Brother Malco walk up and down behind me and felt slippers. The steps sounded wrong. They were too soft. Halfway through, the sound stopped, and a whisper came so close to my left ear that it moved the hair. Listen. I clenched my jaw to keep it from shaping a reply. I said the words forward into the room and tasted old wood on my tongue. After, Brother Aurelian nodded and gave me a black stick of wax and said, "Keep this until you break it." I did not break it for a year. For the seal, he let me cut my palm and add my blood to the wine, then asked me what I was remembering while I stirred. I said my mother's grave. He said that would do. He took my hand and pressed it into the wax and asked me again what I was remembering. I said the day I left my village without a word. He frowned and made me start over. He made me confess that I was thankful my father had not come after me. When the feather brushed the wax then, it bent and sprang back true. For the 2-in-1 night rule, he did not test me. He could not. He read me the entry in a ledger about the winter of wolves and let me copy it in my hand. He made me write every letter exactly as it had been written. The same cramped slope, the same cramped spaces, even the smudges. He said we copy the fear as well as the words. Later, when 2 carts arrived within the same hour in my 4th winter, a fever in the hill parishes, I spread St. Renaud's sand and sat on the step where the cold begins with the rope of 7 knots around my wrist and the smallest bell in my pocket. 1 cart waited above, 1 below, and I listened to them breathe the way a house breathes in winter. Nothing else happened. That was the work, too. For the opening coffin, he opened one himself while I watched. "A misdriven nail," he said, which is a lesson about nails, but not about fear. He had me hold my palm on the lid until it shivered, then step back and speak the patron's name. I felt foolish until the air grew sweet, and the sweetness went bitter, and my eyes watered without smoke. We sealed it. He made me smell the goose feather. It held the incense like a memory. There are small rules for small moments. Do not scrape wax from your nails with your teeth. Do not use the washing water twice even if it looks clean. Do not place the book on the coffin lid even for a heartbeat. The book remembers weight as well as words. Do not let a visitor stand in the doorway. A visitor must be fully in or fully out. Thresholds are mouths. You might ask what happens when we fail. I can tell you what I have seen and what the book says. When we failed to keep footsteps behind us, a novice years before my time who turned and answered out of habit. He left footprints up the stairs that had to be planed smooth and relayed, because every time someone stepped on the deepest print, the lamps trembled. When a seal was made with cellar wine by mistake, the wax went dull and grainy and fell away in the first winter storm. We woke to lids shifted in their beds. When a fevered custodian bled into the mixture, the wax took his print, but not his obedience. It held until the first burial hour, and then bled down the side of the box like a tear and hardened on the floor. It took 3 days of psalms and 7 hands to lift the air back into place. Brother Aurelian would say, "The rules are not punishments, they are measurements. They measure how close the living must stand to the dead without wearing the dead like a coat." I did not understand that then. I think I do now. I sleep in a narrow cell and I dream in narrow lines. I wake before sunset and shake my hand to make the scar under my thumb go white again. I check the jars and the ropes and the wax and the bells that never ring unless asked. I copy the strips of vellum into the ledger so the book can remember not only the words, but the way a tired hand leans. And when the cart comes and the bells clear their throats, I set the lamps high. I speak forward, I untie and do not break, and I count the silences between names until the room chooses quiet. You will say these are too many details for simple work. It is not simple work. It is a dam made of small stones in a river that has no end. The rules keep the stones from slipping. The rules keep my hands from doing something clever that will feel right and ruin everything. The rules keep the earth from comparing one ending to another and deciding it can improve them both by opening what we have closed. And if you ask again why I keep them so closely, I will tell you plainly, because when I do, the wicks stand straight, and when I do not, they cry. The cart came before sunset, which is wrong. They should arrive after. The driver held up a board with the Archbishop's black seal, impressed 3 times. Expedite. It read in the small script of the chancery, Inter duos Lucas, between two lights. Brother Malco and I cut the cords by untying, never breaking, and slid the young priest onto the washing table. He could not have been more than 20. The vellum strip under his chest band named him Father Lucian of San Justo. Last Mass at Terce, last phrase heard. Non nobis domini non nobis, spoken in the cadence used for grace before bread, which is not where that line belongs. I did the feather test. The feather trembled as if a fly had landed. I did the horsehair and reed. It hummed. I began the silence count. 7 saints, the small equal spaces between, and in the spaces the lips moved. Rule 1 was plain. Never bury while the body is still praying. I bound the mouth with rose-salted linen and waited. The lamps held steady. The lead leaves over his eyes were warm to the touch, which can happen in summer. But this was a spring evening, and the third flight keeps its own seasons. When the hour turned, I broke the archbishop's wax on the board and read the whole order. Expedite, even if the prayer persists, using the emergency rite of contemptus oris. I stood a long time with the wax piece in my palm, letting the heat of my hand soften it back into a dull coin. Brother Malco said nothing. He had seen the emergency rite used once and did not speak of it, only made the sign over his chest and left the room the way a man leaves a sleeping child. Contemptus oris is not choking. The book forbids choking. It is a denial, tying bitter fennel to the jaw hinge, rubbing the gums with must from last year's grapes, placing a pinch of ash from the altar candle on the tongue so the mouth will not believe it is being answered. I hate it. The first time I learned it, Brother Aurelian watched me rub the ash and said, softly, "You are not closing a door, Tomas. You are reminding a door that it is a wall." I washed Father Lucian warm, no boiling. The cloth at his jaw creased with each tiny movement, as if a word waited just behind the teeth. I changed it twice and kept my own mouth shut. The vellum strip I copied into the ledger exactly, including a shimmer in the ink where the scribe had paused on the second non. The lead leaves I pressed smooth, punching the star pinholes clean so the light inside would have a place to go. I marked the coffin, cross, key, closed eye. I pricked my palm, 3 drops into the wine, stirred with thorn, breathed once on the copper funnel, so my breath would be part of the marrying of black and white wax. The feather bent and sprang back true. The seal accepted me. We waited for the burial hour. Footsteps came behind me halfway to the second hour, soft, priest shoes, a weight that wanted to be seen. I did not turn. Confession is not for our house, I said forward into the room. Pass to your patron and rest. The steps paused. I said again, Father Lucian of San Justo, pass to your patron and rest. Something leaned close enough to move the hair by my ear and whispered the first syllable of my name. I rang the smallest bell once. Its mouth shook a little and then stilled. The steps withdrew the way a tide retreats when it remembers itself. At the third hour, we lowered the coffin. The lid lifted against my palm. Not a slip, a turning. I stepped back, took the vellum strip, and spoke San Justo's name 3 times, with the church pause. Sweetness came to the air, and then bitterness, and then sweetness again, and the lid settled. The wax took my thumbprint without spit. Malco set the mallet in my hand, and I drove the nails home, each one with the same strength. No anger in the arm. Anger is a crooked hammer. The crypt corridor breathed differently as we carried him to the narrow trench. It has a sound when the walls breathe, stone that gives and takes. Tonight the give came on each toll of the tower bell above, as if the bell were teaching the ground how to count. We laid him east-west, mouth away from the door, lamps high so our shadows stayed on the wall and not on the box. I sprinkled St. Renaud's sand in a thin line across the threshold, though the rule did not require it. Fences for the fence. We covered him. First loose earth, then tamping with the flat of the shovel, then the last smoothing pass that writes forgetfulness into the skin of the ground. Silence held. We stood and listened to be sure. On the 4th breath after the last spade stroke, the earth lifted under our feet and fell again, slow and deep, as if a sleeper had turned on the other side of the mattress. I put my palm flat to the soil. The pulse I felt there was not mine. It beat in time with the tower bell, and then between the bell and then under it, making a third, softer clock. Malco mouthed the night hymn's first line without sound. The second line would have risen, and rising is wrong. I spoke San Justo's name toward the floor until the air smelled of incense, sweet, bitter, sweet, and then kept speaking slower. Each name of our abbey, each name of the hill parishes, each name of the saints I could say without tasting blood. The breathing slowed. It did not stop. The soil rose and fell like the flank of an animal trying not to be seen. When I lifted my hand, fine dust clung to my palm as if the ground had drawn warmth from it and did not want to return it. We waited through the changing of the lamps. Wax tears cooled on the brass, thin and clear, and I wiped them with a linen that already knew blessings. On the wall by the trench, 3 long ovals appeared in the packed earth, not footprints, not handprints, shapes like the ones the novice had left years ago when he turned at the wrong time. They were deeper than they should have been. When I pressed my thumb to the edge of one, the skin there stung as if I had touched nettle. I marked a place in the ledger with a small cross and the word breathing. Back in the workroom, the lead leaves we had taken from Father Lucian's eyes lay where I had set them. They were warm again. I lifted one between finger and thumb and saw that the pinprick stars had burnt the cloth beneath into tiny constellations, the holes edged with brown. The wine and blood mixture in the jar showed a faint film at the rim like breath on winter glass. I stirred it with the thorn and the film broke and ran in a circle and then returned to the rim, as if it had learned the shape of the jar and wanted to keep it. I wrote everything into the ledger. I drew the thin line for the tower bell where the breathing fell and rose, a third rhythm below the other 2. I copied Father Lucian's last phrase and underlined the word non that should not have been where it was. I pressed my thumb, still grainy with dust, into the margin and let the dust print there, a dumb witness. At dawn the breathing stopped. The soil lay flat as if it had always been flat. The wax tears on the lamp cups had gone from clear to cloudy, the way old glass does. When I unwrapped my palm to wash, the cut I had made for the seal was wide and pale, the scar under my thumb bright as a new moon. I went to the stairs and stood on the 3rd step from the bottom, where the cold begins. It began higher. That morning, by the 2nd step, the Archbishop did not come down. A boy in Chancery Gray brought a note. No exhumation, no second inspection, no prayer at the trench. Keep custody. The last 2 words were written in a different hand, heavier, a hand that leaned hard on the quill. I folded the note and placed it in the ledger between the pages for this week. When the boy had gone, I held the lead leaves in my palms until their warmth went into my skin, and I said the first line of the night hymn once, very softly. You will ask what I think it was. I think our prayer was not the only prayer in the room. I think the earth listened and tried to answer. I think Father Lucian's mouth was learning to speak to the ground the way water speaks when it finds a crack. And I think the book has a page I have not yet been brave enough to read, the page that explains why a coffin can breathe after all the right work has been done and all the right words have been said. I will find it, not because I am curious, because the bells have learned a new count. At first light, I took the vellum strip from Father Lucian and climbed to the sacristy. The corridor smelled of cold brass and damp wool. I should have slept. Instead, I asked the Chancery boy to open the archive. He shook his head until I set the black stick of wax on the table and said, "Custodian second, ledger inquiry." He fetched an iron key that looked too heavy for his wrist and led me into a long room where papers slept in wooden trays. I was not looking for a story. I was looking for a reason the ground had learned to breathe. The first bundle held visitations, the second dispensations, the third, a narrow ledger stitched in gut with the title in the same cramped hand as our book, De Noctis Sanguine, of Night Blood. It was not in the index. Someone had tucked it under an inventory of broken monstrances, as if shame could hide paper from ink. The dates ran back 2 centuries. The entries were brief and colder than our crypt. Name, parish, last mass, phrase last heard, condition of lips, eyes, breath after death, and 1 word for cause, possessio. But in the margins, another hand had written over possessio in a small, careful script, transfiguratio. Not possession. Transfiguration. I turned pages until I found a Winter of Wolves entry that matched our ledger. Same hand, same slope. A line instead of words drawn between two names buried the same night. The margin note there did not say Transfiguratio. It said Contagio Oris, contagion of the mouth. I read until the light through the high window moved from gray to pale. Patterns emerged. The men taken were almost all clergy or men with many memorized prayers, chanters, confessors, hermits who said the hours alone. The last phrases heard were never blasphemies, never screams, just church lines placed where they did not belong, rhythms bent into loops. After death, the lips continued. The breath was gone. The mouth kept making shapes. I found a folio sewn into the back like a bandage. Instructions ad custodes, an older version of our rules written for custodians before the book was bound into calfskin. It was blunter than De Sepultura Maledicta. It said what the book only implies. The wine and living blood is not a charm. It is a bond. The living writes his name into a debt with the dead, so the sealed prayer cannot call for more. 3 drops for body, word, and breath, so the earth counts 3 and stops. It called the seal fides obligata, obligated faith. It warned that a custodian will feel a pull under the thumb scar in the burial hour for weeks after a hard case, as if the ground tries to pick him up and carry him away. Another page showed a map of crypt aisles like ours, dots for graves connected by faint lines. Not a cross, a mesh, a net, a circle made of small circles, every coffin a knot. Beneath it, 5 words, Vinculum super apostolos negros, binding over the black apostles. I felt cold up to the wrists. I did not know the name, but I knew a title when I saw one. This was not about hiding shame. It was about pinning something larger to the earth with 1,000 small nails. I closed the ledger and put it back where I found it, under the broken monstrance's list. The chancery boy watched me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He had not slept either. He asked if I had found what I needed. I said I had found what I did not want. The archbishop was waiting in the sacristy, as if he had been carved from the pillar. He did not ask why I had gone to the archive. He did not mention Father Lucian. He set a palm on the black wax stick I had left and said, quietly, "You understand now why we keep the name Possessio for the faithful and another name in the margins for ourselves. People can forgive a priest for being attacked from without. They will not forgive him for being transfigured by his own prayers." He watched me as if I were a candle he needed to judge by its smoke. I asked him if we were curing anything. He said, "We are containing. Containment is mercy when remedy fails." "Why only priests?" I asked. His mouth tightened, not unkindly, "Because they are the only ones who can pray without breath long after the breath is gone. Habit is a riverbed, Tomas. The current follows it even when the river has run dry." I told him the ground had breathed under our feet. He closed his eyes, steepled the fingers of both hands, and recited without voice the first line of the night hymn, the one that does not rise. When he opened his eyes, they looked old and full of iron. He said, "The mesh is holding, but one knot strains the others." I told him the vellum strip had shimmered where the hand paused on the second non, and that the lead leaves had warmed twice. He nodded once, a grim teacher hearing a student recite correctly. He said that the star-pricked leaves gave light a path, not so it could escape, but so it did not build pressure and blow the lids. He said the emergency rite of contemptus oris was not to silence the dead, but to starve a mouth that had forgotten what food is for. Words feed worse than bread, Tomas. We deny the mouth, so it cannot grow from our answer. We walked down together as far as the second flight. He did not cross to the third. Archbishops seldom do. At the door without a lock, he stopped and placed the back of his fingers against the wood, as if it were a forehead. He said softly, "You will be asked soon to keep 2 endings in one night. You will want to refuse. You will look to your rules and raise them like a shield." Then he looked at me fully. "Keep custody," he said. "Bring both to ground." His tone made the words an order and a plea. I said, "That breaks the rule that keeps the ground from comparing." He said, "The ground is already comparing. Better it compares 2 of ours than 1 of ours to 1 of theirs." The phrase "theirs" chilled me. I asked him if he meant the Black Apostles. He did not answer with words. He set his signet ring on my palm. It was warm. It left an oval of pressure like a bruise. After he left, I stood a long time on the step where the cold begins. Today it began on the second step, not the third. I went to the workroom and took the book from the olive wood chest. I turned the pages with clean hands until I reached a leaf that always stuck in damp weather. I teased it apart with the corner of a linen. Ink bled through in mirror script from a page that must have been scraped and written over long ago. I held the page to the lamp and read the ghost of a sentence. The custodians are chosen because their fear runs straight. A straight fear can be laid as a rope across a pit. I pressed my scar under the thumb and felt it throb to the rhythm of the tower bell. The third, softer clock beat in between. In the afternoon, a messenger brought 2 boards with the Archbishop's seal, impressed 3 times on each. The orders were identical, written by different hands. Expedite, inter duos lucis. Use the emergency rite. No vigil, no choir, no bell. At the bottom of the second was a line in the smaller, careful script I had seen in the archive margins. If the lids lift, name their patrons until the air obeys. I copied both strips into the ledger, while the ink still smelled sharp. Father Matteo of St. Bridget, last mass at Sext, last phrase heard. Pater Noster said non dimit, wrong, bent like a broken rail. Father Evo of the Hill Hermitage, last mass unknown, last phrase heard. Kyrie eleison sung in the cadence of a tavern song. Both young, both fast. Brother Malco sharpened the mallet handle with a knife, because the old smoothness could not comfort the hand tonight. I checked the jar, wine and blood, no film. I unwrapped 7 ropes of flax that have never seen the sun, and set the lamps high so our shadows stayed where we could see them. The bells did not ring, but the smallest trembled a little against the wood from the beating of my own pulse. I would like to tell you that I refused. I did not. Custodians do not choose which stones they lay in the river. We only lay them and hope the water runs straight over. I set the black and white sticks in the copper funnel and breathed once on the lip, so my breath would live there when the wax married. Then I took the thorn and I cut my palm, and I thought very hard about nothing but the words in the book and the weight of the mallet and the step where the cold begins. Night came early. 2 carts waited at the gate. The bells cleared their throats. Night dropped like a lid, and the tower bell put a rim on it. 2 carts at the gate. 2 boards stamped 3 times with the Archbishop's seal, the same small chancery hand. Expedite, inter duos lucis. Brother Malco and I opened the first cart. Father Matteo of St. Bridget, untied, never broke, washed warm, no boiling. Last phrase heard. Pater Noster said non dimit, cadence turned wrong, like a prayer wearing a stranger's shoes. The feather trembled, the horsehair hummed. Rule 1 said wait, the order said bury. I tied bitter fennel at the jaw hinge, rubbed the gums with last year's must, touched the tongue with a pinch of altar ash. Contemptosaurus, deny the mouth, so it cannot feed on any answer we might give. The second, Father Evo of the Hill Hermitage, smelled of pine smoke and frost. Last phrase heard, Kyrie eleison, but carried on a tavern beat. The knuckles were burned as if he had gripped iron in deep cold. His vellum strip had 3 ink blots. I copied the blots into the ledger. We marked both coffins. Cross at the head, key to the right, closed eye to the left. I pricked my palm for each. 3 drops into altar wine, stirred with thorn, breathed once on the copper funnel, so my breath would live in the marriage of black and white wax. The feather bent and sprang back true for both. The seals took my thumb without spit. Still, I tucked St. Renaud's sand into my sleeve and slipped the smallest bell into my pocket. Fences for the fence. We took Matteo first. Halfway down to the 3rd flight, footsteps followed, soft, careful. The weight of a priest wanting to be seen. I did not turn. Confession is not for our house. I said forward into the stairwell. Pass to your patron and rest. The steps kept pace, then stopped at the place where the cold begins. Tonight it was the 2nd step, not the 3rd. At the door without a lock, the air tasted like coin. Lamps high, shadows kept to the walls. I spoke St. Bridget's name 3 times with the church pause. Sweetness, bitterness, sweetness, and the lid settled. Nails in with the same arm, no anger. We laid him east-west, mouth away from the door, and smoothed the earth with the last pass that writes forgetfulness. The ground listened and said nothing. We brought Ivo next. As we passed Mateo's fresh trench, the soil rose and fell once, like a sleeper turning. Not the coffin, the ground. The third, softer clock began under the bell, and between its beats, counting on its own. At the second pit, Ivo's lid lifted toward my palm before I touched it. I stepped back, took the strip, and named St. Kenneth 3 times. No incense. I named the parish. Nothing. I named the abbey. The lamps wavered. Thin tears of wax ran up the cups as if the brass itself were exhaling. The lid rose another finger's width. Malco's hand found the mallet by habit. I shook my head. Pressure makes the dead stubborn. Names make them obedient. I began the 7 psalms for enemies, laying each like a flat stone in running water. On the 5th, the air turned sweet, then bitter, then into a taste like cold bread. The lid stopped rising, but did not settle. Behind us, the wall soil began to right itself. Long ovals pressed into the packed earth, 3, then 5, then 7, walking toward the door without feet. Mateo's smoothing pass blurred as if rubbed by a damp thumb. The bell above tolled, the third clock beat between. Under both, a hush tried to become wind. The ground was comparing. 2 endings before it had finished reading the first. The younger calls, the older answers. You could hear it in the boards, a low vowel, then a higher echo. Not words, only the shape of them. Habit without breath. I spread St. Renaud's sand across the threshold in a narrow path and looped a rope of 7 knots tight around my wrist. St. Bridget, I said. St. Canna. Our abbey. The air took the shapes and gave them back wrong, as if a mouth below were mouthing after me like a child. Malco formed the first line of the night hymn with no voice, never the second. Rising is wrong. The lid lifted a hand's breadth and held, not for lack of nails, but because a palm below seemed to measure us through the plank. The seal sweated gray. I spoke the emergency phrases from memory. Starve the mouth, deny the answer. Fennel, ash, wine. The smell that came was not incense, it was winter iron. Mateo's trench cracked. A thin seam ran head to foot, and from it came the sound of paper breathed upon. Malco went to his knees and set both hands flat to the earth, calm as a teacher. The earth can count, Tomas, he said softly, then louder to the floor. St. Bridget, keep. St. Canna, hold. He was naming the knots in the net, not the men. The archive map rose in me. Dots for graves, faint lines between, a circle of small circles, a binding over the black apostles. I began to speak the names in our aisle in stone order. The benefactor with the chipped saint, Brother Aurelian with his rope, the unnamed man whose strip had no last phrase, the canon who sang wrong and left his sleeve scorched, the hermit who never came up from the second flight. Each name a knot, each knot a weight, each weight a promise. The wind that wanted to begin tangled itself. The third clock slowed. Ivo's lid sagged a finger's width. The lamps steadied. For a moment I believed. Then the spare boards from the carts split down their seals with the sound of wet parchment tearing. The chancery hand had written expedite 3 times. The black letters looked like cuts from the broken seam. A thin ink line crawled across the floor toward Mateo's trench and sank into the crack like water into thirst. The third clock caught a new rhythm, off our bell and under it both, as if something outside the net had found the edge and plucked it to learn our tone. Ivo's wax popped. A bead leapt to my wrist and burned a neat circle above the scar under my thumb. Blood welled, slow, then steady. The skin around it reddened into a small inverted cross. I pressed my sleeve and tasted iron that did not come from my mouth. Malco's eyes widened, but his hands did not leave the earth. Hold your fear straight, he said. Lay it like a rope. I tightened the 7-knotted cord until it bit and worked the names again. Bridget, Canna, our abbey. The ring of hill parishes, the saints from this year's strips and their tired lean, smudges and all. copy the fear as well as the words. At last the air turned sweet, then bitter, then sweet and stayed sweet. Evo's lid sighed flat. The hot bead on my wrist cooled and dulled. We hammered nails. 1, 2, 3, no anger. Mateo's seemed knit from head to foot. The ovals along the wall blurred and filled like prints in rain. The smallest bell in my pocket rattled once and went still. Silence held, not the slam door kind, but the working quiet that comes when the room chooses stillness over us. I held out my palm. The cross stopped bleeding, but the skin throbbed to the low clock as if the mark were listening for something far away. We swept by the threshold. 2 words had been traced into dust by a hand that did not understand lines. Non nobis. Not the whole sentence. Only the misplaced fragment we had already heard with Father Lucian. Back in the workroom, Lucian's lead leaves were warm again. Their star-prick holes had browned tiny constellations into the cloth beneath. In the jar, wine and blood showed a thin winter glass film. I stirred with the thorn and watched it break, circle, and return to the rim. The copper funnel tasted of coin on my tongue when I cleaned it. The rope of 7 knots left round prints on my wrist like small mouths. I drew the 3 clocks in the ledger, bell between, under, marking where they matched and where they slipped. I recorded the board splitting, the ink line finding soil, the bead that burned a ring, the dust words, the way the lamp steadied, the way the cold had moved on the stairs. I pressed my marked wrist into the margin so the book would remember weight as well as words. Malco washed the basins and set the tools on their hooks as if it were any other night. When he was done, he stood with his hand on the olive wood chest and said, "The Archbishop will say the net held. He will be right, but a held net is not a calm river." On the steps, the cold sat again on the 3rd, where it belongs. Relief came and left quickly. In its place, I felt the circle on my wrist count with the low clock below the stone. Near dawn, I walked the aisle alone, lamps high. Over Mateo and Evo the earth lay smooth, the last pass holding forgetfulness. At Lucian's trench, I set my palm down. No rise, no fall, only the memory of breathing, like warmth left on a bench at morning. You will say we broke the rule and were not punished. That is not quite true. We were measured. The measuring is not finished. The lids fell. The seams knit. The room chose quiet. Yet a line of ink learned how to cross from wood to soil. My skin learned a mark it did not ask for, and the ground learned the taste of 2 endings late, too close. If the earth is comparing, it knows us by name now. One of those names is mine. The other is written in a neat margin hand in a book that tries not to be read. Black Apostles. I think they have begun to count us back. At noon, the chancery boy brought only a ring. The Archbishop's signet sat in my palm, warm as if just lifted from skin. No board, no order, no seal. In place of a note, a thread of black wax ran across the band in a single stroke, like a closed eye. The boy said he was told to say 1 sentence, and say it once. Keep custody. Then he looked past me, as if someone had been standing at my shoulder, and fled. The mark on my wrist answered the ring. 1, 2, 3 bell between under. I went to the archive alone. The room was cold enough to fog my breath. I pulled the Noctis Sanguine from under the broken monstrance's list and opened the back seam. A leaf I had not seen before was stitched inside with the hair-fine thread. Ultimus Ritus, the last rite. The ink was old iron and smelled faintly of wine. A custodian is chosen for fear that runs straight. The page began. When a knot strains the net and the ground learns 2 endings in 1 night, a living seal may be laid. The seal must be made between 2 lights. The custodian must prepare as for any priest, but change 2 things only. He must deny his own mouth with ash and fennel, and he must keep the first line of the night him unrisen in his chest until the earth takes it. The living blood is his own. The last vellum strip must carry his name in his hand. I read each line until I could see it with my eyes closed. Then I shut the ledger and bound it in olive wood and iron again. Malco was waiting in the corridor. He saw my face and said only which step, 2nd or 3rd. 3rd, I said, and it felt like mercy. We set the workroom, as we always do when we want no mistakes to find us. Lamps high, Shadows kept to the walls. Tools in order. Wax sticks, black and white. Copper funnel. Thorn. Rope of 7 knots. The clay jar with altar wine. The linen I had read over 100 times. The lead leaves with their star pinholes cleaned. He hung the smallest bell where my hand could find it without looking. I cut a new strip of vellum, ruled it narrow, and wrote Tomas of Viarno, custodian second, last mass never, last phrase to be heard none. Then, obedient to the page that told me to copy fear as well as words, I wrote the small lean my hand makes when I try to hide it. I placed a strip under the chest band of a pine box lined with rough wool. Cross at the head. Key to the right, closed eye to the left. I pricked my palm and let 3 drops fall into the wine. The feather bent and sprang back. The seal would know me. Malco stood very still. He said, "We can wait. We can send for the archbishop." I showed him the ring. He looked at it as if it were the last light in a house. Then he nodded once. He asked for rules. I recited them like a litany so neither of us could pretend to forget later. 1. Do not bury while the body prays. 2. Do not turn when footsteps come. 3. Seal with living blood in altar wine. 4. Never bury 2 in the same night. 5. If a lid lifts, name the patron until the air smells of incense. 6. I added, though it is not in the book, keep custody. He said, "Which one will you break?" I said, "The first. I will keep the prayer unrisen, and you will bury anyway." I washed as we wash the dead, warm, not boiling. I salted the mouth band with rose. I tied bitter fennel at my own jaw hinge and rubbed ash on my tongue. The taste climbed into my eyes. I pressed the lead leaves over my lids and saw stars through pinholes. My hands did not shake. My fear ran straight. We carried the coffin to the 3rd flight. On the step where the cold begins, I stopped and put my palm to the stone. The 3rd clock beat under my skin and under the stair both. Between 2 lights, the page had said. The noon outside had already thinned. The crypt air lifted and fell like a sleeping animal trying not to be heard. In the aisle I laid down in the wool. Malco tightened the chest band and tucked the vellum strip beneath. He did not bind my hands until I crossed them myself against the cord measured to the altar rail. He lowered the mouth cloth, and I breathed once through fennel and ash. It scalded my throat like a fast swallowed wrong. He looked at me, and I looked at the ceiling through lead leaves and pinhole stars, and said the first line of the night hymn once, silently, setting it flat in my chest and not letting it rise. Lid wax. Copper funnel. The marriage of black and white. He breathed on the lip, so his breath would live there. I felt the feather graze the seal and spring back true. I felt his thumbprint press obedience into the wax above my head. I wanted to speak his name, so the air would smell of incense for him if it had to. But that would have been an answer, and answers feed. Footsteps came behind him then. I could hear them through wood and wool and blood. Soft, priests wait, wanting to be seen. He did not turn. Confession is not for our house. He said forward, into the room. Pass to your patron and rest. A whisper came that moved the hair at my own ear through the cloth. It said the first syllable of my name and waited. I tasted more ash. He began to nail. 1, 2, 3, no anger. Each strike set the first line in my chest flatter. Between blows, the 3rd clock counted under the bell on my wrist. When the last nail head sat flush, the world became a box with good joints and a friend's breath somewhere above it. They say earth is heavy. It is also patient. The first shovelfuls were sound and weight, then damp, then the soft push of tamping. The last smoothing pass wrote forgetfulness into the skin over me. The ground listened to the prayer I was not saying and laid itself down. The 3rd clock slowed. It did not stop. Heat gathered under the lead leaves from my own eyes. I kept the hemline flat and unrisen. It tried to climb. Breath wanted to be prayer. Prayer wanted to be mouth. Mouth wanted to be bridge. I pressed my tongue to fennel and ash and thought of the rope of 7 knots. The step where the cold begins. The feather bending and springing true. Brother Aurelian's hand on my brow. You do not win by choking a river. You win by moving the banks. I imagine my fear as a straight rope across a pit and laid it there, knot by knot. Something put its palm to the lid from the other side of the earth. It measured me through wood. The air went sweet, then bitter, then sweet again, faint but real. Incense under soil. Obedience remembering itself. I heard Malco speak the Abbey's name once. Not to call, only to name, and then no more. Good. No choir. No vigil. Between two lights, only the work and the keeping. The third clock fell into step with the bell on my wrist. Under. Between. With. 3 lines that had argued now lay side by side, like boards well planed. The mark above my scar cooled. The ring against my ribs. He had sit inside the box without telling me. Lost its warmth and kept its weight. I do not know if I slept. I know the earth chose quiet. I know the lid did not lift again. I know the steps behind Malco stopped at the place where the cold begins and did not cross. When I woke, in the wordless way one wakes underground, air moved through the pinholes like a slow hand. Somewhere above, a bell counted the hour I could not see. It sounded ordinary. That is all a custodian ever earns. If you ask what became of the Archbishop, I can only tell you what my hands learned after. The ring is no longer in the chest. A vacant space sits in the ledger where a name should be, and a dot on the archive map has been inked in darker, tightening the line of a net you would not notice unless you knew what knots to name. If you ask what became of me, I will tell you plainly. I keep custody. The lid is between me and the room is between me and the earth is between us and the thing that counts. The last right is not a death. It is a weight. I have been laid as one more small stone in a river that has no end. One rule broken, all the others kept. The ground listens, and then it chooses quiet.